Good morning, and welcome back to Spidz YouTube. CDS is a trade week where you're able to trade your champions with other champions, either from what I will call the center or from other players. It allows you to change what your roster is, and there's a lot of thoughts that you can go into it. Trade week has ended as I'm recording this, and I did no trades, and there were only two players that did no trades. Mafroju, who I will try and say Mafroju instead of Mafrau. I accidentally on the interview said Mafrau, and I felt really bad because now I know it's Mafroju, despite Jansport's, distaste. But I didn't do any trades, and I wanted to explain why. I wanted to go through some of the logic that I came up with regarding trades. I really should have done a trade. Making this slideshow made me realize there was like 2 or 3 really good trades that I could have done and didn't do. But I only did that when making the slideshow. Maybe I should have made the slideshow during trade time, but whatever. I'm recording this a few hours before my Zaun game, and I'll probably upload this before the Zaun upload, just to give you like a time frame. Because after the Zaun game, right, like I will somehow know if like doing a trade would have impacted the Zaun game more, right? But there are 2 types of trade. There's trades with the center. You can only do 1 as far as I know, and they must be within your tier, right? So if you remember ages ago, there's 1S, 2As, 4Bs, infinite, or 8Cs, but 3Cs, depending on how you want to organize it. You can trade with the champions that weren't chosen. Now, I'm not going to show you what those are. It might have been useful to have that aid, but generally speaking, it's not too important. I'll bring them up when it's necessary. But there are, 8 A tier champs, 4 S tier champs, 3 C tier champs that weren't picked, for example. You can also champion exchange with enemy gamers, right? So if I said, hey, Ikato, I want to give you my Gwen for your Katarina, right? Ikato might say, yes, Spidz, also, you're so cool. I will subscribe to you right now. And I'll be like, thanks, Ikato, for your support of Spidz YouTube. But that's something that they both have to agree on, and they have to be within the same tier, right? So Katarina and Gwen are both S tier champions. Now, I have changed this into what I'm going to call like the 4 different trade types, right? When you're trading, there are 4 different things you can try and trade for. These are the regions to trade. The first is within region upgrading. The second is going out of region to get access to another region. The third is going out of a region to get access to a playstyle choice. Now, you can do that within a region, but that's slightly less important. And then the 4th type is, haha, I fooled you, sunglasses emoji. You thought this was a good trade, but in fact, I have just used my brain to beat you. So let's go through all of these, because I think splitting it up into these categories is quite important. So if we're going to talk about within region upgrading, like what do I mean by this? Like what is the point of this, right? I think generally speaking, Leona is a better champion than Taric in the CDS. I think generally speaking, Samira is a better champion than LeBlanc, and I think Akshon's better than Nasus. Now, there are scenarios where if you've got Thresh or Kindred, one could argue that Nasus is better. I still would say Akshon is better, just with the flexibility of being able to get out of your Thresh and Kindred. If you're bringing Nasus, and you want to do like you want to bring Shurima, but not for Kindred Nasus, right? You would have wanted Akshon in that position. And if you want to bring Thresh Nasus because you think it'll be really good one week, look, Nasus is weird because it is the win con of the deck, but I still think Akshon would be better for you, because if you're somehow arguing that like a mid-range SI self-kill package is going to win you that round, I think you could still justify Akshon for that sort of matchup. Now, that's slightly less probable just because Nasus is like that main win condition. But if we go to like LeBlanc and Samira, right, like even if you've got Ashe LeBlanc, I still think Samira will be better. Not necessarily because Samira's a better card in Ashe LeBlanc than LeBlanc, but I don't think LeBlanc does just enough compared to what Samira does for everything Noxian, right? You can Samira with anything and it'll work, but can also turn on your Ashe, right? Same with, Leona and Taric, right? Some of these are contingents, but I think generally speaking, if you're trying to like do something within a region, like I have Taric because I like Targon, or I have LeBlanc because I like Noxus, you should change that for better versions of something within that if possible. This is the simplest form of trading, right? It's the least creative, it's the least necessary, it's the one that you can quickly tick off to see if there's any before you move on to more interesting trades. So I'm going to go through all my champions and explain why I didn't do them with this, because I think some are more contentious than others, right? So for within the S tier, I have Gwen. Now, I was given the option of Gwen and Elise during like the very start of the trade, and it was still available. And I went with Gwen because I prefer Gwen's playstyles. Now, Elise could be better if I wanted like a fearsome aggro, or if I wanted something along the lines of like Sentinel's control. But I don't think Gwen is bad in those, and I much prefer Gwen. Gwen is definitely one of my favorite champions. I'm not that big on Elise. I'm just not like... Elise is fine, but if I have the choice between Gwen and Elise, I'm going to choose Gwen, and that's why I didn't exchange Gwen for the other S tier Shadow Isles. Pantheon. So Leona is also an A tier champion, unless it's B tier. Don't tell me Leona's B tier. Give me a second. Leona is B tier, and I still disagree. Leona is B tier. I strongly disagree with Leona being B tier, but Leona is B tier. So ignore this. I still think Leona might be better than Pantheon in some regards, but whatever. Ignore this. I thought Leona was A tier when I made this document. So Pantheon's like, there's no better other Targonian A tier champion. I would prefer Leona over Pantheon, but I don't think Ikata would do that trade. Because Leona's really good for his stuff with the Katarina, with, you know, just generally, he doesn't really have, like, the big mid-range stuff that, like, Pantheon needs as support, right? He doesn't have access to Shurima, and I don't think he has access to Demacia anymore because he got rid of Puppy. So Pantheon doesn't actually do that much for him, so he would never do this trade, even if it was possible. Hey, sorry, slightly future Spidz here while re-listening to this. My Nah slide was wrong in many ways. Lulu was an A tier, Poppy and Yuumi weren't A tiers, and Rumble wasn't on the list. So I'm gonna just redo this bit. Nah can go with a few things, right? Nah can be exchanged for many other Bandle City champions. I'm gonna ignore the Freljord half, like the Edwani and the Sejuani and the Udyr thing. I think those are fine, and Sejuani is okay with, like, you know, Alawi and you do plunder, but I'd have to do that as a trade to Mafriju, who I don't think would want to take that sort of thing. And I also just, like, I think Nara is better than Sejuani. And then I think Nara is obviously better than Udyr just because of the flexibility towards Bandle City. But there are a lot of options that you can exchange Nara for. If we just stay within, like, A tier, right? We could go Fizz, Ziggs, or Lulu. All of these are available. There was also Rumble and Teemo. Rumble was owned by someone, owned by Capitao, and then it was put in the center. Capitao got rid of Sion, but still has Rumble, right? So I write were earned, but I think, like, Capitao would probably do the trade where they get rid of Rumble. I think that's not a bad trade for them since they got rid of their Sion for Set. Now for Fizz, I think is a pretty decent trade. I think a lot of people would do a trade like that because I think they respect Fizz and they respect like Biltwater as a region, maybe more than like they respect Freljord as a region. I personally don't respect Fizz, not because I don't respect Biltwater. I just don't like Fizz. Fizz isn't an enjoyable champion or playstyle for me, and whenever I build Taskmaster decks, I often don't run Fizz. I like actively try and not run Fizz. I'm not a big fan of Fizz conceptually. And so if I'm going to choose between Fizz or Nara, I'm going to end up picking Nara over Fizz most of the time. Ziggs is extremely close. I think Ziggs is really, really justifiable. I think Shurima is a really good region. Generally speaking, like in LOR, Shurima is a good region. But I'll expand more on Shurima later, but I don't think Shurima is better than Freljord for my lineup in the CDS. With Lulu. Now, Lulu wasn't something I had on the previous slide, and I think Lulu can make sense as a replacement for Nah. I think there are worlds where double Ionia is better than having Freljord, and I think, like, Nah, the only thing Nah gives me that Lulu doesn't give me is Bone Club, and, like, in theory, access to Harsh Winds and Buried in Ice. It's pretty much the only thing Nah gives me, and technically FTR. But, like, I don't think Lulu's benefits, which would be, like, slightly more aggressive stuff, like Ionia or Elusives, or a second deny region, is that much better. This is definitely a side grade, and this one's pretty debatable, but I don't think it's inherently, like, a fantastic trade. I think, like, the Lulu one and also the Teemo one are, like, really, really justifiable, and the Rumble one. I think, like, a lot of these are justifiable, but I like Nah, and I think Nah combines with Darius a lot better than anything else, and I could remove Darius and Nah for stuff, but that's, like, a much more complicated trade, and I don't know if I'm willing to go that far into changing my lineup into something that may not be better than it. Rumble, I think, makes a lot of sense. If I was to do that with Capitao, get access to second Noxus. I think second Noxus is probably better than second IO. But I do think Nah is better than Rumble if you're not going all in on Rumble. And because I don't have access to PNZ at the moment, I don't think I need Rumble. Like, Rumble doesn't... I don't get to do a Rumble thing. Like, having Rumble would just be because he's a 4-mana 5/4, or because he gives me access to Noxus. While Nah can sort of do Nari things on his own, just because Nah doesn't really have that many contingencies. Like deck building restrictions compared to Rumble trying to do Rumble things if you don't want to just Rumble to be just Rumble. I don't think Rumble's bad. If I wanted to go double Noxus, I think it's a pretty decent line to change Nah for Rumble. I think there are people in the world who would change Nah for Rumble in the same way there are people in the world that would change Nah for Lulu. And I think there are people that would try and offer Nah for Teemo against Elzon. And then eventually I think I got it. I don't think that's a bad choice. I don't respect PNZ, and you'll see why later. I'll talk more about Teemo later when I talk about PNZ. But I don't respect the PNZ region enough. Poppy and Yuumi, I think, are options. Now, I'm including Poppy and Yuumi here only because there is a world in which I get rid of Nah, and I get rid of something else like a B tier to have access to Poppy or something like that, right? So I could have gotten rid of, for example, Fiora for Poppy, and then Nah doesn't have to necessarily be a Bandle City card, or I can have double Bandle City. I don't think those are bad. I think Demacia isn't necessary. For every reason in the future that I mentioned about Shurima, I think you can say a very, very similar thing about Demacia, and you'll see the Shurima argument later. And while I think Poppy, like, Bandle City aggro is decent, I think, like, I could have done something where I pivot more into Bandle City stuff. I think that was a very justifiable line. Whether I'm going out of Nara into stuff that's slightly better with the Bandle City stuff, like Ziggs or Lulu, or Timo, or I have a double Bandle City where I go into Puppy. I think all of those are justifiable lines. I didn't go for them. I think that Nah is better than all of these for the way that it works into my lineup with the Darius and with a few other things that I've been messing around with as well. But it's not to say that these are bad or anything. I just wanted to, like, input this. It's slightly awry because I'm editing this, and what I ended up saying was, like, a bunch of, like, stuff that wasn't correct, and Lulu wasn't on the sheet, and, like, I said that Poppy was A tier and Yumi was A tier. I just wanted to fix that. And I just reset everything for fun. Okay, enjoy the rest. Bye. Varus. Varus doesn't have any direct Runeterra comparison, so I don't think it's really fair to include this. He is the least flexible champion in my roster. I have been messing around with Varus Alawi, Varus Gwen, Varus Shen, but it's never better than other stuff I can bring for the same stuff I'm trying to do that week. Varus Pantheon being in my back pocket is nice, but we'll explain more about Varus, because Varus is one of the most unique champions when it comes to the trading aspect. So I know I'm offloading a lot of this. Trust me, it'll make sense later. Alawi. So Gangplank is the only other build Wardian B tier. I don't think Ikato would take this trade. Gangplank's pretty good for him. Alawi isn't bad for him, but I think Gangplank does more for him. And I think he prefers Gangplank as a card. In addition, Alawi's pretty decent for me with the Gwen Alawi stuff. And Alawi isn't bad for Shen, and I think with Gangplank, I would need to force Gangplank more than I need to force Alawi to do stuff, right? So Gangplank is better with stuff like Nah, Gangplank, aggro than Alawi is in that sort of deck. I don't think that's debatable. But I think with stuff like Gwen, Alawi is better. I think with stuff like Darius, I actually think Alawi and Gangplank are pretty tied. If I wanted to go for that sort of aggro deck, I don't think Gangplank is bad, but Alawi is pretty good as just like a 4-mana 3/6 overwhelm that Mirai wardens out a unit, right? I think that's true for a lot of things. Gangplank can work with Nah to create like Plunder without Sejuani, which isn't bad, but if I think that like Plunder will work or like Monkeys will work, I can force Alawi into that as well. I think Gangplank is fine. It allows me to expand into aggro just a tiny bit, but I've survived with Alawi when I've wanted to do that before. Fiora. So there are a bunch of B tier Demacians, and I think Fiora is still the best one. So let's go through them. Lucian is less flexible. Lucian's decent in the fact that he is just like a small unit. You'd never need to care about Lucian. You can just run Lucian, maybe some centers, and like, you're not going to ruin your deck, right? You can run Demacia as much as you want. But Shen Demacia will be better with Fiora. Alawi Demacia will be better with Fiora. Taric Demacia will be better with Fiora. Pantheon Fiora is better than Pantheon Lucian, right? All of the matchups that I have possible will be better with Fiora than Lucian. It's just slightly less flexible, right? And Fiora having the win the game win condition can matter. While Lucian sort of has that, but I think it's less important. If I want to do like a Shadow Isles Fiora deck, I don't think Lucian... I think Lucian might be slightly better, but I think Fiora generally is better with all the other stuff more. That's why I think Fiora is just better than Lucian for this. Garen is pretty equal. Now, Garen was eventually taken by Tempo, but there was an option where I could have done the Garen thing. But I respect a 4/4 challenger more than Garen in everything except elites. Now, I think Garen might be better in like a Sivarakshon-esque thing than Fiora, just because Garen is Bruiser. But I think a 4/4 challenger is better with most other things than a 5/5 regen that gives the +1/+1. Puppy. While Puppy offers Bandle, I do think Fiora meshes with my archetypes more. Now, I don't think Poppy is a bad choice, and we'll talk about Poppy a little bit more later, but I think Fiora better meshes with the Gwen, the Pantheon, the Shen, rather than Poppy. Shyvana, Dragons is possibly like a really strong Demacia deck, more than Fiora says I am a strong Demacia deck. But if I want to bring big Demacia, I can bring Fiora, and then I can bring like, you know, Screeching Dragon or Cytherea the Bold if I really wanted that big Demacia energy. Galio, Lex Flexible, very similar to Shyvana. If I needed big Demacia one week, I can make big Demacia, right? I've got the Varus Pantheon, I've got the Fiora, I've got Alawi, I've got all these big Demacia stuff if I need them. And then Quinn and Lux trades are very, very similar. Quickly go over the last ones. Darius, I think, is genuinely better than Sion on Riven. Now, Riven isn't bad. Like, Riven isn't a bad option. I think Riven plus Gwen is just as good as Riven plus Darius. I think Riven might be better with Alawi stuff in some situations. I don't think Darius is bad at all, but I think Darius is better with Gnar than Riven is with Gnar. And I actually think Darius is better in aggro decks because of the mana investment. I don't think Riven is bad in aggro decks, but I'd rather have Darius, especially Darius's Decimate, than Riven and Riven's Weapon Hill. And then Sion is just less flexible. Thresh is the best SIC tier, Maokai is the other. I don't think that's debatable. Icado has no reason to give me Karma. For Shen, Capitao has no reason to give me Yi. I think Shen's better than Yi, but no reason to give me Zen. I would have really loved Kennen, but there's no reason for Capsule to ever give me Kennen. And then Ari isn't better than Shen. And then I wanted Elzon to give me Asol for Tarek. This is the only trade I actually asked for someone. And she said no, obviously. She doesn't need Tarek, and I obviously really want Asol to go with my Thresh. So, no. So if we go over these, like, I don't think any of these are too surprising. I think the Gnar stuff is debatable, right? I think Alawi with Gangplank is debatable, and I think Fiora with Poppy is debatable. But that's about it. I think those are the only within-region upgrades that I think are pretty decent. So let's go with out-of-region access. I have one Runeterran, one Freljordian, who is also a Bandosidian, one Noxian, one Biltwaterian, one Demacian, one Ionian, two Shadowfilers, and two Targonians. I don't have any Piltovans or any Zornites, and I don't have any Shreemans. So why not get access to them? I've got spare Shadow Isles and Targonians, and I could also remove one of these to have access to them. Why not go over them? Let's start with Piltover and Zaun. So there was a short period before Icado nicked her that Vi was actually in the center. And I could have also done trades for Victor or Teemo or other things, but I personally, as a player, don't respect PNZ's gameplay as a region. I think it works decently as a support region. If I want to build a lineup that's like, I'm going to bring Noxus control, like Noxus SI control, I'm going to bring Bilgewater and then PNZ control, and then Freljord Targonian control, or something like that. I think PNZ is fine, but I'm not going to start my lineup thinking about PNZ. I think that's a pretty rare thing to think about doing. If you think about Karma set, right, like, the Caustic Rift, the Mystic Shot, and all that stuff is important, but I think the reason you're playing that deck is because Concussive Palm or Facebreaker or whatever is a much more important access. I don't know if that deck runs Concussive Palm, by the way. I still don't know what's rotated. I struggle to keep all of that in my brain. But like the most important stuff is like the coin plus Karma stuff, right? You can bring that deck into other regions and it's fine. It's just Piltover is a pretty decent support region. I think in my experience, which isn't like that much, and it's me with an already negative purview on PNZ, I don't go into metas thinking this is a great meta for PNZ. I always think PNZ could do something here as a support to this other region, right? And I don't respect PNZ enough to try and put into my draft for that reason. I also don't have access to that many PNZ decks. I have Fiora Harp. I can force PNZ Varus or PNZ Gwen. There's also, like, you know, Sentinels. There's PNZ Nox Control. I can force these to happen, but I don't think I need them. Like, PNZ Nox Control is equidistant to SI Noxus Control into most things if Noxus Control is going to be really good one week. I think PNZ Varus and PNZ Gwen are cute, but I don't need them. And I don't respect PNZ enough for me to feel like I really want to get that Vi so I can make Vi Varus, which isn't going to be a bad deck. I just don't think it's worth it compared to the stuff I'd lose to have to access Vi, like Darius or like Fiora or something. I could lose Varus for it, but I think I'd rather have Varus than PNZ. Now, Teemo does give me aggro options. I think Teemo is honestly like a really good choice to do a trade for. And if you're thinking about my lineups, right, like, I can bring triple mid-range. That's fine. I can bring 4 mid-range decks or 5 mid-range decks if I really want. But if I want to bring a triple aggro lineup, it's going to be aggro, aggro, and a mid-range, right? I can bring Gwen Alawi, which I can build as aggro. I can bring Gnar Darius, which I can build as aggro. And then what? Right, I can split that up more. I can do Darius plus Tarek, and it's just mono Darius, and, you know, there's 3 Tareks. Or you could do, you know, Gnar Fiora, which is just like Yordle aggro, but with Fioras in there, right? And then you've got this sort of stuff, right? I can demark that more, but Teemo would help me with that more. Like, PNZ aggro is an option. Same with Bandle City aggro. But PNZ control is less interesting to me, and I don't think that Teemo aggro is worth it just enough, especially since I'd be giving up Gnar for it. And I think Gnar isn't bad, but Gnar is also decent at aggro because you can just do the Bandle City side of the PNZ side. I don't think this is a bad choice. I think other players would definitely do something where they go for a PNZ. It isn't for me. I just don't respect PNZ enough. Shreema. Now, I've included this here. I was going to include this in the last slide, but there's so much text on the last slide. This is my ranking of my enjoyment of the regions, right? So my favorite region is Targon. My second favorite region is Shreema. Bilgewater and BC are pretty close. Noxus and Demacian is pretty close. SI and PNZ is pretty close. Then there's like 3 gaps and then Ionia. And then on my Google document where this comes from, On row 1001 is where it says Freljord. I don't respect Freljord at all. But you'll notice Shurima is quite high. But I don't want Shurima. And I think it's because Shurima, while decent at anti-mid-range, or anti-control and anti-mid-range stuff by being like a really decent mid-range region, I don't think I can just get that by doing a random Shurima. And I think trying to force that to happen is worse than doing that with other champions. So I can play mid-range. I can play Pantheon, or Gwen, or Fiora, or Shen, or Darius, or Null, or Thresh, or Taric, or Lewy, or Varus. Right? I have access to mid-range. If I was to take Renekton, what would that do? What am I gaining? Rite of Negation? Like Quicksand? Like, what am I accessing by having Renekton? Right? If I'm removing Darius for Renekton, right? What am I gaining? What is coming towards me, right? I'm getting more access to mid-range, but fuck me dead, I've already got mid-range. There is, like, Shurima aggro, right? You can run Bloodthirsty Marauder, and you can run, you know, Merciless Hunter and Rockhopper, and you've got, like, weird aggro choices. Ziggs is, like, the best choice for that, and I can have gone from Gnar to Ziggs, right? I don't think Ziggs is bad at all, but Ziggs Darius aggro exists, but so does Gnar Darius aggro. Ziggs Gwen exists, but so does, like, Gnar Gwen if I really need to force it, right? Like, I can force these things. I can make these even grander. Like, I could do 3 or 4 trades. When I say grander here, I mean, like, do 3 or 4 trades to completely change the lineup. But I don't think it's better than doing grand things with a Gnar. I just don't think Shurima makes too much sense to me. Rite of Negation isn't bad, but I don't think it's necessary, right? I could do Rite of Negation and Shen, have a double deny lineup, do decently until 1 week. But I just don't think it's necessary, and I don't think Shurima offers me anything just because I've got so much so much mid-range. Now, if you're someone like Elzon, who has like 3 Piltovans, 2 Targonians, and you don't have any access to mid-range, I can totally see wanting Renekton. And, fun fact, Elzon got Renekton. And I can see that. I can see you wanting to go to Renekton because you want to pretend to do mid-range. And Renekton gives you great access to mid-range all of a sudden. But I don't need that. So what about second access to regions, right? I could have gotten rid of Varus to get access to Riven, right? So I get rid of the Runeterra. If I've said that I've already got access to mid-range, I don't need Varus to do mid-range stuff, right? If Triple Demacia wins run week, I don't need Varus. I can do Fiora, Gnar Darius, Alawi Shen, and win. Right, if mid-range is going to win that week, I don't need the Varus. And if I want to double Noxus, then I could easily get Riven, right? Riven is perfect, right? It's just another access to Ravenbloom, right? That is definitely a very, very good trade. Varus can also be exchanged for Poppy for very similar reasons. I think Poppy is a pretty good choice. I don't think it's mainly for the Demacian half, because I've already got the mid-range, although, like, if I wanted to bring that, I could replace one of those decks with another Demacia deck. Like, I could then do Gwen... you know, Gwen Poppy or something like that. If Minimoth was going to win a week, or Tree was going to win a week, or aggro is like necessary 1 week, and Poppy does better aggro than Varus, I don't think Poppy's a bad choice. I think both of these are really good trades. I also think if we're saying that, like, I don't need Pantheon Varus, I think you could remove Targon Pantheon for Ziggs, right? Give me access to Shurima, which is okay. Like, I'm getting rid of a mid-range, but I'm getting access to another mid-range, right? And I'm getting Band of City, which means I can do more aggro, right? I don't think this is a bad trade at all. So why didn't I do any of these? I forgot. So, like, I don't think these are bad. I think these are good. I made this a few hours after trade week ended, and only then did I think about I could lose Varus and Pantheon, right? Varus and Pantheon were the things I was most willing to give up if I were to do a trade, but I hadn't formalized this into, like, lineup-based thinking. Right, I hadn't gone through that process. Now, the first day and a half or so of lineup construction, I was still finishing off some assignments for uni, and then the last stuff was like me relaxing. I'm very bad at uni. I need like relaxation time after assignments, and I need to like block off assignment week to just do me. Like, I can't be too self-critical about the way I'm accessing my life, because I struggle during like assignment time during uni, and it happens once every month or so. It's just not my time. So I wanted to relax. And so while I did think about trading a lot, I primarily focused on this stuff because it's much easier to formalize. And obviously, like, it's obviously not going to matter because these things are pretty obviously, like, how I want them. So I think I could have done Varus for Riven. I think that was, like, a really good trade. And I think if I was to go back in time, like, 3 days, I think I would justify to myself getting rid of Pantheon Varus for Riven. Now, the only issue is I don't think I would do both. If I did both, what I'm doing is I'm handing Pantheon Varus to anyone who has like a spare A and B tier. Like all of a sudden, Absolution's Pantheon Varus. Now, I don't think that's bad, but I think Ikato would see that and just take Pantheon Varus and somehow make it so no one else has fun. So I think I'm glad I didn't do both, but I think like if I could have done Varus for Riven, I think that's like a really good choice. The last thing I want to mention is that like the last thing that I want to do is do a trade and then regret it. I'd rather not do a trade than regret it than do a trade and regret it. And I think like I'm pretty comfy with my lineup nowadays. At the start, I was like really down on my champions, but having like my 30 decks, all of my options, I think my champions are getting more and more interesting to me and better for me. And I don't think I want to get rid of that for Riven. I like Riven. I think Riven's cool. I don't think Riven's good enough. If it was a instead of Riven, if it was something like, not LeBlanc, if it was something like Draven, maybe this would be more appealing. But I don't know. It was partly I only made this afterwards, and I think all of these trades are really good. I think there are other trades that are very similar to these that you could do. I think these 3 trades are some of the best trades that I missed out on with the center, but I didn't do them because I forgot. I'm going to quickly touch on playstyle choices. This is another thing I vaguely considered. So I was thinking of picking up Evelynn and removing Taric, Shen, or Thresh. I like Tree. You're going to hate this. I like Tree. Eve Tree sounds like lots of fun to me. I think Evelynn's a super cool champion, and I've loved the idea of keyword slinging for a long, long time. I think like a mid-range deck where every unit has 2 or 3 keywords is a super fun concept. I love that as an idea. I think Evelynn can afford you that. And I don't think Evelynn is that bad. I think you can build Evelynn with my cards and have a decent deck. It's not going to be better than these, but I think Evelynn's fine. I think if I was stuck with Evelynn, I wouldn't be complaining about it, but it's not something I'm going to gravitate and access specifically, right? It's not a... If I was in a draft format, I know I'm in a draft format. If I was in Expeditions, and Evelynn was offered to me in my lineup with something like Ahri and Malphite as the other options, Evelynn is definitely going to be what I take there. But since Taric, Shen, and Thresh are my other options, I think they're better than Evelynn. Varus, for any PNZ. I like PNZ and build Taskmaster. This is one of my favorite decks of all time. Taskmaster and PNZ. I think allowing PNZ could actually just do that for me, and I could have gotten rid of a Varus for the access to PNZ. When I say in my interview there was a time I wanted PNZ, like there was one time, it's just this. This is the only time I wanted PNZ was for like Taskmaster. I don't think that's worth it. I don't respect PNZ enough to just do that, and I think having Varus Pantheon as like the best mid-range deck that they have to ban or elites is just insane. And then Gwen for Akshan. I considered this quite hard, but it's actually like the reason not to do it is the inverse of the Varus logic. I don't think Akshan gives me enough in terms of like mid-range stuff. And it's back to the Shurima stuff. Like Shurima's just not a valuable enough region. But I considered this hard because Akshan like does fit with my lineup a lot. But for the same reasons that I think you can remove Varus, I think is the reason not to access Akshan. I'm hoping this is just going to be a short video. It's 25 minutes. That's short. Finally, there's the option where you fool someone. I think this is cool. During the draft, I never really thought about this too much, and I think a lot of other people gave it like 1 or 2 shots, right? Like Absolution says in his interview that he didn't want someone to have access to Annie Jin, right? Some people mentioned that they don't want to give other people access to certain things. I think that's fine, but I'm not going to shoot myself in the foot just to make someone else's day slightly worse. Morally, I'm totally okay with that, but in terms of like strength, I think that's unnecessary. I think I have one of the strongest lineups, and I think part of that's because I don't have any champions that are bad. I think Taric might be the worst champion objectively, and I think Varus is the least flexible champion, but I don't think those are bad. And compared to some of the like worst champions that other players have, like, you know, Kayn or Maokai in Kayn or Hecarim in Elzon, or Bard in Puffball, or something like that, I think I'm fine. I think Ikato, and maybe Mafra are the only ones that don't have like bad champions. Maybe Capitao as well. And when I say bad champions, I just mean ones that are like underpowered. And like something that I could say, haha, I fooled you into taking this when it's not actually that good for you. I don't think it's worth it. Now, if I can do that in addition to one of the other ones, that's fine. But if I never did one of the other ones, I'm not going to do this. Last thing I wanted to mention before the video closes, I know this was like relatively short for a Spidz YouTube, is to check out the CDS stuff, right? Like if I'm getting like 79 to 147 views on the Spidz YouTube, but like they're getting 9 to 42, like check out the CDS stuff. They're pretty good. They're lots of fun to listen to. I think it's interesting to see how these people are responding to their own challenges. And I mean that just in the sense of like how they're viewing the draft and like their lineups is pretty different to how I'm viewing my drafts and lineups. They also do weekly recaps where they go over like a really interesting deck of the week and they show one of the more interesting games. They're really interesting, and it's not something that I've ever seen in like LOR before, and it's really cool. I really recommend just checking some of these out. I've got my interview in the CDS playlist, but if you go to just the CDS channel, right, like you can find some really fun stuff. And there's at least a video about like the trade week and what people could have done and what the lineups look like. I really recommend checking these out. It just saddens me because like I think they should get more views than my stuff does, because their stuff's really, really interesting. But thanks for watching. That's just it. The video will come out whenever it wants. But I wanted to quickly go over why I didn't take anything. To like TLDR it, I think that my champions are decent, and while I think it's very justifiable to do any of these, I didn't do them because I didn't think about it hard enough, basically. Yeah, that's basically it. Bye.